Greetings of peace to you all. We are happy to be back with you after our initial session last week, and I hope you have had a nice week, a nice day, evening, morning, all the times around. In the last program, we discussed the concept of light and darkness, or white and black, as metaphors that brought in the commonalities of many faith communities, mythical traditions, and cultural norms that were all bundled together. In a way, an attempt was made to show that our human cultures and communities have much more in common than is often believed. Although for various reasons, as we attempt to define ourselves culturally, the tendency is to separate ourselves, to define ourselves differently. The emphasis is on distinction, and often a distinction in which our own superiority is established through our own perceptions, of course, over every other. And in that sense, a culture becomes an extension of the self within the individual. So if the individual self cannot be tamed within, then obviously it grows into a sense of self-centeredness. And that self-centeredness does not remain within our individuality. Rather, like the waves within a lake, when we drop a stone, those waves spread out. And depending on the strength of our culture norms and the political power that is often attached to the realm of our geographic influence in a cultural context, it becomes the domain of that perception. So the individual psyche becomes the collective psyche. And within that collective psyche, the self still dominates. And just to help you understand the philosophical jargon that I'm throwing out your way, perhaps due to my too many years of teaching, I sometimes forget that lowering down the vocabulary for a popular understanding is often sacrificed with a bit too much of professionalism. I'll try to do that. Think about, say, the Western culture. Self-centered as almost every other culture, no difference there. But then we expanded it to a point where we measure the worth and value of every other culture based upon our own. We try to define defects and shortcomings, a sort of devaluation of the others, and revaluation or re-evaluation of our own cultures to establish our superiority through what is often referred to as cultural relativism. And that relativity is the closer you are to the self, the higher you gauge your own worth, measure, and value. and the farther they are from you, the lower and the less significant they are. And so in that sense, our culture, our religion, our belief system, our lifestyle, even the food we eat, those all become extensions of ourselves. Even if we leave the cultural part of it, if you put that aside, we also see that in the geographic sense, our self-centeredness extends to our nations and countries and states, however they may be defined. Then they go further to that not only we consider ourselves as the center of this global community, but then we take the global community considering the center of the universe. In other words, the whole universe, however it may have been understood, churns around our reality. And of course, it had to take some scientific discovery, at least in the West, although there are understandings that other cultures may have understood the heliocentric concept better than the Western culture. But regardless, until that concept became established, the Earth was the center of the universe. Then when we finally convinced ourselves willy-nilly that the Earth is not the center, but the Sun is the center, so the whole universe became heliocentric or sun-centered, and by that it was meant our sun. And later when we discovered that that was not so, and so we keep going on and on with that. So our belief system also suffers from this self-aggrandizement of sorts, in the sense that we become not just the center of realities that we define, but also we become the norm and the standard by which we measure others. In the context of a divine-human relationship, as I said earlier, in the last session we talked about only one particular dimension, that of light and darkness, that had become a thread that weaves through the fiber of our common human culture. In today's program, I would like to make an attempt that many of the myths, of the legends, of the stories and of epics that have become part of our culture, or religious culture rather, they too have commonalities that can be traced far back than we would like them to be. In other words, because we would rather believe our own personal religious scriptures to be the norm and the standard, God-given, that's between quotations. Therefore, we feel hesitant to trace it back beyond the historical setting of our belief system, because in that our scriptural dominance will lose its originality. Now, my personal belief is, understanding. My personal understanding is that the scriptures used narratives, stories, and legends, and epics, and myths, not necessarily because they were true in the way we define truth, as fact, as a happening, as an observable reality as such. Rather, the truth of the legends and the epics is that they were the vehicles that enabled humans to understand things better. They were a medium, not the ultimate objective. That yes, their historicity may be questioned, and that's not a problem. The etiquette, the values, the teachings stand on their own. But the tendency has generally been that legends referenced in the scripture are given a reality of their own. And because that may or may not have been so, it, in essence, drives people away from truth the way some religious faith communities define and describe them. From my own tradition of Islam, I believe that when Quran references stories or histories or pseudo-histories, they are not meant to be historical. Whether these are individual characters or historical events or seemingly historical events. Rather, the emphasis of the Quran is that it used those as points of reference, because such tales and stories and myths were part of the culture setting in at least the entire region of that which is Southwest Asia, also known as the Middle East. And so the stories were there, but only as a vehicle through which truth can be told, not necessarily as historical facts. And the reason for my reasoning is that if we perceive any reference in the Quran to any seemingly historical incident, and if such seemingly historical incident proves to be wrong, then the whole scripture will be questioned. So Quran is not a book of history. It has no interest in proving the historicity of any of the things that it refers to. It is not interested in finding that which is a happening. The Quranic term would be, or the Arabic term would be, waqiyat. Waqiyat is a time-determined reality. In other words, that which has happened within the time-space dimension, which in other words would be history. So Quran is not interested in the historicity of individuals or events it is referencing. Rather, it's interested in the truth that can be told through expressing such truth in the context of legends and stories that were already established, that were part of the cultural norm in the entire region. And so today I'm going to share with you, I think we emphasized a little bit of the Egyptian, the ancient Egyptian narratives in the first program. Today we are going to go to Mesopotamia. which is roughly modern-day Iraq and perhaps parts of eastern Turkey, Anatolia, perhaps parts of Iran and Syria. So I'm mentioning the modern-day state boundaries to just give you an idea. But Mesopotamia, as the word implies, is the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. In Arabic, it's often referred to as Bainun Nahrain, which comes from an older term of Baitun Nahrain. And in Persian, it's referred to as Mian Rodan. So whatever language we use, the whole region is basically the region between the two rivers. We also call it the Fertile Crescent because the two rivers have fertilized the land, to an extent very distinct from its environs to the north and south. It is not coincidental that our first discussion was centered on the river Nile, whereas this one is going to be centered on these two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, because that has occurred mostly in a historical period that is often referred to as the hydraulic societies. When human communities, the early human communities, moved out of jungles and forests as hunters and gatherers, and when that period passed, then they were looking for ways to plant their food, and so we entered the age of the agrarian society. The agrarian society, by necessity, of course, needed water. And these waters would have to be found, of course, in the rivers, and therefore the early cultures evolved, developed, and sustained themselves around or in the banks, along the banks of great rivers, the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River, Ganga, and so on and so forth. So the river is important because of the water. Now, the epic I'm talking about today is the Epic of Gilgamesh, or as its original Sumerian name would be Bilgamesh. And I'm sharing this because you would notice as I go through the various, reading the text of the various tablets, of course, in translation, that we can trace many of the myths and epics and stories and legends of many of our today's 21st century religious belief systems. We can trace them back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is dated to the 21st century BCE. Since we are in the 21st century of the Common Era, CE, that kind of puts the dividing line of the calendar. So we are talking about nearly, over 4,000 years. And this is understood as to be the earliest surviving great work of literature from the literature perspective. However, we are not interested in the literature part of it in our discussion. I'm simply alluding to that because its earlier record is only because we have it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other cultures didn't have similar perceptions before, but perhaps they were not written. So it was in Mesopotamia where they began, at least in this one form of writing their text. Of course, we have the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and we have the Mesopotamian tablets, the clay tablets on which they wrote. And now I would also reference our discussion about the pen and its significance in the context of the cumulative human knowledge that we discussed in the first program. So the Gilgamesh or Gilgamesh story is one that happens in the city of Uruk, which would be in modern southern Iraq. And Gilgamesh would be the king of Uruk. And of course, we understand very well how most of history becomes an account that are, if not totally biographic, at least centered around the political characters, kings who happen to be political, religious characters in the past. So the first surviving version of this epic, that is known in as the Old Babylonian one, has its incept, or the beginning, the opening, as the Shutur Ilishari, or the surpassing all other kings. So in a sense, it's human-centered. This king surpassing all other kings. Just remember, I explained the self-centeredness of our humanity. So the more power you have, the more ability you have to make yourself the center of all that. Then we have later the standard version of this epic, which introduces it as the Shanakba Imuru, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, is he who saw the deep. And the deep implies he who sees the unknown. And the deep and the unknown are related both etymologically, as even in modern languages, like in English, when we refer to something deep or the depth of something, we are talking about that is not just beyond the surface, but a more deeper or more complicated, or understanding of its complications, rather. And this perhaps also comes from the fact that both in Egypt and in Mesopotamia there was an underworld to which all the unknowns were referenced, or rather in which all the unknowns were referenced. And of course the darkness and all that was discussed before. And in terms of historical reference, these discovered tablets are believed to have been part of the Library of Ruins in the 7th century BC. That is the period of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. So you can see that even then, even at the time of Ashurbanipal, these legends in their recorded form would already have been more than 1,500 years old. The first, there are 12 tablets. The 12 is a little inconsistent in reference to the narrative described, the narrative of Gilgamesh. We will go through some of them and kind of cherry pick the concepts that make the point, that not only do we have a commonality in the belief systems horizontally, like in the very present right now, going across cultures, but we can go along the span of time into the past, that we have plenty of commonalities there too, that would help us understand the myths. Now, the first half of the story discusses the king Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, and the Enkidu, his sort of opposite number in the conflict, and he is perceived to be a wild man created by gods to stop Gilgamesh from oppressing the people of Uruk. So therefore, the concept of God and God's shadow side, as it's perceived, has its origins even then, more than 4,000 years ago. What we understand as, at least in the Islamic context, in the Islamic belief system, as God and Iblis, or Adam and Shaitan, or us humans and our nafs, that we are conflicted in a way that there is a power struggle between the good and the evil within each one of us. And this struggle within ourselves between the good and the evil, the yin and the yang, the black and the white, the light and the darkness, has origins in the sense that Gilgamesh, who was believed to be 2/3 God and 1/3 man, now has a conflict, and the conflict is that even this character, being 2/3 God and 1/3 man, is not capable of controlling himself, and he suppresses his own people. So in that sense, the divine and human realm is also conflicted. There is also a struggle. Otherwise, the suppression would not have been relevant. And so in order for this suppression to be tamed, to be controlled, or to be pushed back, the gods then create an opponent to balance Gilgamesh's acts, and this opponent is Enkidu. And then of course the two parties now, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, get into a fight, after an initial fight, Gilgamesh and Enkidu become close friends. So that shows a kind of a reconciliation. The black and the white kind of reconcile and turn into a gray zone, if we can label it that. And once this happens, the two of them together journey to the Cedar Mountain and defeat Humbaba and its monstrous guardian. And later they kill the bull of heaven. This reference is also very archetypal, that in many cultures, and perhaps in the oldest cave paintings that we have found, the bull has played a major role. And let's take a short break, and we will be back with you after this interval.